So what do you think it takes to become a good private detective?
Well, to be an excellent private detective like me, and to a lesser extent Rob, the number one thing is to get into the mindset of a detective. And one of the easiest ways and best ways to do that is to look the part. As you can see, I'm wearing a classic fedora, detective style, like 1920s old movie style. More practically speaking, I'm wearing special detective shoes. I'll show you what they look like. As you can see, they don't look like shoes that you'd be used to, like leather shoes with like hard soles. These are very light. You can only get them in specialist stores. I like to call them sneakers because you can be very sneaky in these. Or because they're very light, you can run really quickly after an assailant. So otherwise, I call them runners. I'm not sure what the real name for them is. I think they're just called special shoes. You can only get them in army surplus stores, specialist spy gadget stores, that kind of thing. But yeah, they're essential, even more essential than the fedora.
I'm pretty sure that they're just standard sneakers that you find in most shops.
Sneakers is the name I came up with for the special detective shoes. I'm pretty sure you can't get these in regular shops.
Pretty certain that all plimsolls or sneakers, as you call them, and most people call them, are just used for general day-to-day.
That's okay that you think
walking.
that, but let's just agree that I'm right now. Okay. The next most important thing about being a detective, point number 2, is use protection. I tell everyone that wants to get into this game, use protection. It's very important that you use protection. I have this little gun here. It's called a Raging Cowboy. Yeah, it's just a handy, light little thing that you can keep in your pocket, just on the off chance, just so you can wing a guy, like if he's running away with a briefcase containing stolen goods or laundered money.
Do you
can just,
have a
wing
license for that?
Actually, technically, this is an antique, registered as an antique, so I don't need a license because I think it's like 120 years old. And the next point about being a detective, you must be sexy. You have to be sexy. It's the most important thing to have in your detective toolkit. Be sexy. I can't tell you the amount of times myself and Buckley have gotten out of a tight situation by using our seduction or using our sexuality or raw sexuality to seduce someone or distract someone. Like Buckley. He's great at this. He's really good at seducing people. If I had to sneak into a building, he would seduce the doorman and take him back to a side alley where he would keep him occupied while I sneak into the building.
In what way would he keep him occupied?
Well, in standard sexy ways that you might be aware of, but there's no reason to get into the sort of details. Rob. He's really good at this. I leave the seducing to him most of the time. Even at home, when we're not in a case, he'll try and seduce me just to keep his skill up. I have to say, sometimes he's so good at it. Sometimes he's successfully seduced me. But that's what you have to do to be an excellent detective. To answer your question, these are the things that you have to do.
How did you become a private investigator? It's a very unusual career choice.
Well, I was a journalist. I was a foreign war correspondent for Nosy Liberal magazine. I was covering the ongoing conflict in Antarctica between the Inuits and the Americans. Unfortunately, after returning from my first tour, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And although I explained to them that it was post-traumatic stress, which means I'm after the traumatic stress, I'm perfectly fine. they wouldn't keep me on because of the random outbursts of violence.
Random outbursts of violence? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'd hurt people. Mostly homeless people, always smaller than me, usually asleep, and they'd wake up screaming in horror. It's normal when you come back from a conflict like the one in Antarctica to behave a bit strangely for a while, but I'm managing my condition now.
And how exactly are you managing your condition?
Well, I can't take drugs. The doctors said we can give you medication that will cure you right away, but they said I couldn't drink alcohol, which means I couldn't take the drugs. So they said alternatively, they gave me this little dude here. And this is my friend Skeletor, named after the villain in He-Man, a very famous 1980s cartoon series that you may know. I don't know, you look pretty young, you may remember He-Man.
I remember He-Man. What exactly is he in aid of?
Well, he's a confidant, he's a friend, but most importantly, he allows me to beat him up, strangle him, bludgeon him, deflate him and inflate him again, and deflate him and inflate him again. It's my way of dealing with my post-traumatic stress without hurting anybody, like homeless people or cats.
Do you not have to see a psychiatrist or go to any meetings?
No, as I said, it's post-traumatic stress syndrome, which means after traumatic stress, which means I'm perfectly fine.
I don't think that's actually what post-traumatic...
I'm perfectly fine.
How did you meet Rob?
Well, after coming back from Antarctica, which, as you know, was a horrifying conflict, and dealing with my post-traumatic stress syndrome, I couldn't get a job anywhere, so I ended up on the streets of Cork City, begging for change outside bank links and chippers. And Rob Buckley, he was walking down the street one day, and I said, "Spare change?" And he actually stopped. And he said, "Don't I know you from telly?" And I was like, "No, you might know me from the newspaper." And he was like, "The newspaper?" And I said, "Yes, the newspaper. I was a journalist for the Nosy Liberal." He went like, "Oh yeah, that's where I know you from." And then he gave me a sandwich. And I said, "Thanks for the sandwich." And then he asked, "Do you not have anywhere to live?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I am looking for a flatmate." And I said, "Oh, good, but I can't afford rent." And he said, "Do you know what? I'm also looking for a partner for my private detective agency." And I said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Yeah, and you're a journalist, you should have good investigative skills." And I said, "I do." And then that was it. I moved in with him and I became his partner. He basically saved my life.
That's an amazing story.
Thank you.
Were you not afraid when you first moved in with him that this person might be a bit of a weirdo or...
Well, I was prepared for it. I have moved in with old men before that offered me a nice bowl of soup and beer, and they'd ply me with alcohol, and when I fall asleep I would wake up to find the wrinkly hands down my pants. So I was prepared, but there was something about Rob that I could tell was different. I don't know if it was his hair, his wonderful hair, or I think it was his hair. He had wonderful hair, and I was like, that's hair you can trust.
How would you describe your relationship with Rob?
A professional friendship with benefits.
What do you mean by benefits?
It's a friendship where I get to live in his house.
Okay, so you're referring to the fact that you live here without paying rent.
Yeah, what else would you think I was talking about?
Do you like living with Rob?
I like living in a house, yes.
With Rob?
I like living in a house with Rob because otherwise I'll be on the street eating chicken skins out of the garbage beside hillbillies.
Do you find that there's much call in Cork for private investigators?
Oh yeah, there is definitely. Especially in the suburbs. We're suburban private investigators. And people have this image of private investigators in the mean streets of New York City, or like in the grimy alleyways, stinky tenement blocks, minorities, greasy Italians, transvestites. But it's really out in the suburbs you'll get the real demand for a private detective. Rich guys cheating on their wives, insurance fraud, shady businessmen, things like that. People looking for, and a lot of missing pets. It's in the suburbs. People have dogs and cats. That's where people have pets, and that's where pets go missing, and that's where people want someone to find their pets.
How often do you find these pets that have gone missing?
Well, we like to keep a ratio out of 7 out of 10 cats we try and find. And to keep that ratio up, sometimes we'll go to the pound and replace the cat in the picture. Because they generally give us pictures, and we'll try and find a cat that looks exactly the same. Because that way we get paid and the customer is happy. So win-win.
Is that not lying to the client? As you have no evidence that it's the same cat?
Lies are like truths.